Nearly 40,000 years ago, on a cold night in what is now southern Germany, wind moved through a narrow valley and pressed against the entrance of a limestone cave. Inside, a small fire burned. Its light reached only part of the chamber. Human faces appeared, then vanished as the flames shifted. Stone blades lay beside hides waiting to be repaired. Pieces of bone and ivory rested near the wall. Smoke gathered beneath the ceiling before finding its way toward the darkness outside. Beyond the firelight, the cave continued into silence. Someone lifted a hollow bone. We cannot know who held it. We cannot know whether the musician was young or old, whether the people nearby expected the sound, or whether this was an ordinary evening or a moment remembered for years. The scene itself cannot be reconstructed with certainty. But the instrument was real. The player raised one end toward the mouth and released a controlled breath. A note entered the cave. It was not the wind forcing itself through stone. It was not an animal calling from the valley. It was not wood cracking in the fire. The sound had been shaped deliberately by human breath. For a few seconds, it moved through the chamber, touched the limestone walls, and reached the people gathered near the flames. Then it vanished. Nothing remained in the air. No mark appeared on the floor where the sound had passed. No trace settled in the ash. The cave could preserve discarded bone, stone tools, charcoal, and fragments of ivory for tens of thousands of years. It could not preserve a melody. The instrument might fall into the earth and survive. The musician would disappear. The listeners would disappear. The song would end in the same moment it was played. That is the strange mystery hidden inside some of the oldest surviving musical instruments ever recognized. Archaeology has recovered the objects. It has not recovered the music. Thousands of generations later, people entered a cave called Hohl Fels in the Swabian Jura of present-day Germany. They did not arrive looking for a single lost song. Archaeological excavation rarely works that way. The work was slower. Ancient sediment was removed in careful layers. Small objects were separated from soil and stone. Fragments that looked unimportant at first were cleaned, examined, labeled, and compared. Among them were pieces of bird bone. They were thin and pale, easily mistaken for the remains of an animal meal or a broken object whose purpose could no longer be understood. But the fragments carried unusual marks. Their edges had been worked. Openings had been cut into them. When the pieces were brought together, a long, narrow form began to return. It was a flute. The nearly complete instrument had been made from the wing bone of a griffon vulture, a bird large enough to provide a hollow bone suited to the task. 5 finger holes had been opened along its length. At one end, the maker had carefully shaped the area where breath entered the instrument. The flute dated to at least roughly 35,000 years ago, within an early Aurignacian context belonging to some of the first modern human communities known from this region of Ice Age Europe. It was not simply a bone with holes in it. A bird bone can crack under pressure. Its surface is curved. A misplaced opening cannot be moved once it has been cut. The maker had to choose the material, prepare it, decide where the fingers would rest, shape the holes, form the mouthpiece, and test whether breath could become a controlled sound. The work required planning. It required skilled hands. And almost certainly, it required knowledge learned from someone else or developed through repeated attempts. The Hohl Fels flute was not alone. At Geisenklosterl and other caves in the same region, archaeologists recovered additional flute fragments made from bird bone and mammoth ivory. Some came from archaeological layers approaching 40,000 years in age or older. Bird bone offered a naturally hollow tube. Mammoth ivory did not. To create a flute from ivory, a maker had to shape solid material into matching sections, hollow them, join them carefully, and create an airtight body through which breath could travel. That was not an accidental experiment. It was a demanding technical project undertaken by people who already understood what kind of object they wanted to produce. Several instruments, made from different materials, suggest more than one moment of curiosity. They suggest a tradition. Somebody knew how to make these objects. Somebody may have taught another person. And somebody must have wanted the sound enough to spend time creating it. The same caves preserved other objects that offer glimpses into this world: carved animals, human representations, ornaments, and worked ivory. The Swabian Jura sites contain an extraordinary concentration of early symbolic objects dating to the arrival and settlement of modern humans in Ice Age Europe. Yet even these objects cannot tell us exactly what happened around the fire. A carved animal can survive while the story told about it disappears. A pendant can remain after no one remembers what it signified. A flute can endure after the last person who knew its melodies is gone. The people who made these instruments lived in a world very different from the quiet museum cases where the fragments may now be seen. Cold shaped the valleys. Seasons altered the movement of animals and people. Snow could close familiar routes. Rain could soak stored fuel. A failed hunt or damaged shelter could become serious, especially when food was scarce or the weather turned suddenly. But life was not one endless emergency. People prepared food, maintained fires, repaired clothing, sharpened stone, shaped bone, and worked hides. They carried useful materials from one place to another. They learned the behavior of animals, the locations of water, and the changing character of the land. Children watched experienced hands. Skills passed between generations. A stone tool was not produced by instinct. Neither was a fitted garment, a hunting plan, a carved figure, or a flute. These were anatomically modern humans with the ability to learn, remember, plan, cooperate, and imagine. They lived in small communities where survival depended upon knowledge shared among people. Someone had to understand how to keep fire alive. Someone had to remember where animals moved during a particular season. Someone had to know how to turn sinew, hide, stone, wood, bone, and ivory into things the group could use. And somewhere within that necessary world, people made room for sound. That is the contradiction at the center of the flute. It could not bring down an animal. It could not scrape a hide clean. It could not shelter a child from freezing wind. It could not cut meat, carry water, or protect a fire from rain. Yet a person selected a suitable bone and worked it carefully. Another person may have searched for mammoth ivory, split it, hollowed it, and joined it into a form that could carry breath. Time was spent on these objects. Skill was invested in them. Material that might have served another purpose was transformed into something whose value existed only when someone played it and others heard. Why? The obvious answers are tempting. Perhaps the flute accompanied dancing. Perhaps it marked a gathering, helped tell a story, strengthened a ritual, attracted a companion, comforted someone in grief, entertained people during a long night, or calmed a child who could not sleep. Any of these possibilities might be true. None can be attached with certainty to one particular instrument. The flute has no written explanation. No image shows the musician using it. No surviving witness can tell us why the player lifted it toward the mouth. Even the sound itself cannot be recovered exactly. Modern replicas may suggest what an instrument of similar shape can produce. They can demonstrate that carefully placed holes alter pitch and that a hollow bone can carry a clear tone. But a playable reconstruction does not restore the lost performance. We do not know the musician's technique. We do not know the tuning they preferred, the patterns they repeated, or whether the flute played alone beside the fire or answered human voices in the darkness. We do not know whether the melody was old even then. The surviving object is among the earliest instruments archaeologists have identified. That does not make it the first instrument ever created. Music leaves very little behind. Human voices leave nothing. Hands clapping in rhythm leave nothing. Wooden whistles decay. Stretched hides rot. Reeds collapse. Two sticks struck together may look like ordinary pieces of wood even if they once kept time for a gathering. People could have sung or created rhythm for thousands of years before anyone shaped the whole fell's flute. They may have done so for far longer. Archaeology is shaped by what survives, and survival is selective. Stone remains easily. Bone sometimes remains. Wood, skin, plant fiber, and sound usually disappear. This creates an illusion. The oldest object recovered can begin to look like the beginning of the behavior itself. But the first surviving flute is not necessarily the first flute. And the first flute may have appeared long after the first song. Perhaps the maker at Whole Fells was continuing a tradition already ancient. Perhaps bone replaced an earlier instrument made from wood or reed. Perhaps people knew melodies before they knew how to place them inside a hollow wing bone. There is no way to follow the music backward once the physical evidence ends. We can study the marks around the holes. We can examine the stone tools that shaped them. We can date the surrounding sediment and compare the instrument with other finds from nearby caves. But somewhere beyond the last surviving object lies an immense silent territory. Every song performed there is gone. That silence makes the craftsmanship more haunting. The flute was not produced by a careless movement. Its openings were positioned so that fingers could change the vibrating air inside the tube. The mouthpiece was shaped so breath could be directed with control. The maker was not merely decorating bone. The maker was designing an experience that would exist only in time. A carving could be held after it was finished. An ornament could be worn. A flute remained incomplete until someone breathed into it. Then its real purpose appeared and vanished at once. Perhaps that was part of its value. The sound could gather attention without leaving a permanent mark. It could fill a dark chamber larger than the object that created it. One person's breath could become something experienced by everyone near the fire. And when it ended, the listeners carried whatever remained. Not in the ground. In memory. This may help explain why ancient music is so difficult to study. Its most important evidence was never inside the instrument alone. It existed between the player and the people listening. A bone tube can reveal how it was manufactured. It cannot reveal what happened in the faces around the flame when the first note arrived. Did people become still? Did they recognize the beginning of a familiar pattern? Did someone move closer to the fire? Did a child hear the sound differently from an older person who had known it for years? No trace can answer. We might imagine the Ice Age cave again. Outside, wind moves through the valley. The darkness contains animals, cold ground, and distances that must be crossed when daylight returns. Inside, the fire is low. The day's necessary work has not vanished. Tools still need repair. Food must be protected. Clothing must be dried and checked. Tomorrow will demand attention, memory, patience, and strength. For a moment, the flute rests silently in someone's hands. The people remain gathered. They are not waiting because the sound will feed them. They are not listening because it can stop the winter. When breath enters the bone again, something passes through the darkness and reaches every person near the fire. It cannot be stored with meat or carried in a hide bag. Yet someone believed it was worth making. Someone believed it was worth learning. And others believed it was worth hearing. Perhaps survival had never meant only remaining alive. The flute had no cutting edge. It could not pierce hide, shape wood, carry water, preserve meat, or keep a fire alive. Yet its maker may have spent many hours completing it. A suitable bone had to be chosen and worked without splitting. The openings needed to fall where fingers could reach them. The mouthpiece had to guide breath precisely enough to produce a controlled tone rather than an accidental whistle. The maker had to test the result and listen. Meanwhile, food still required preparation. Stone edges became blunt. Clothing wore thin. Fuel had to be gathered. Children needed care. The cold did not pause while someone shaped an instrument. What could music provide that justified this investment? The answer cannot be contained in a single word such as pleasure or togetherness. Inside a small Ice Age community, relationships were not separate from survival. Cooperation shaped whether food was shared, knowledge was remembered, children learned, and people could depend upon one another when conditions changed. To understand the flute, we must look beyond the object and toward the people who heard it. Even a bird bone instrument required accumulated knowledge. Its maker needed to recognize which bones were long, hollow, and strong enough to survive shaping. Finger holes could not be placed carelessly if the player wanted repeatable changes in sound. Breath had to enter at a useful angle. Making and playing were connected. The craftsperson had to recognize the difference between noise and a tone that could be controlled, repeated, and altered. Mammoth ivory demanded even more planning. Ivory is solid and curved, so separate pieces had to be shaped, hollowed, fitted together, and joined closely enough to hold moving air. A poor fit could ruin hours of work. This was patient craftsmanship directed towards something invisible. Several flutes made from different materials suggest that the idea was not one person's fortunate accident. It had been repeated, adapted, and remembered. Someone knew how to make these objects. Someone may have watched and learned. No trace identifies the teachers or learners, but a tradition requires continuity. The human ability to create music was probably much older than any surviving flute. Before instruments, people already possessed breath, voices, hands, feet, stones, wood, repeated movement, and the ability to recognize patterns. We might imagine several people working near a fire. One person scrapes a hide in a steady motion. Another breaks material into smaller pieces. A repeated sound forms without anyone intending music. Then someone matches it. A hand strikes wood at the same interval. A voice enters, perhaps without words, following a pattern that can be anticipated. The scene is only a possibility. No evidence preserves a particular work rhythm in a particular cave. Yet repetition naturally creates expectation. Once a pattern begins, the next sound seems to have a place before it arrives. Music could have grown from movement long before anyone placed it inside a crafted instrument. Wooden whistles may have existed and decayed. Reeds could have produced sound and vanished. Stretched hides, plant fibers, and simple percussion would leave little that archaeologists could confidently recognize after tens of thousands of years. The surviving bone flutes may therefore represent only one durable corner of a much larger musical world. A controlled sound has a peculiar effect in darkness. It gathers attention. Conversation may continue while tools are repaired and food divided. Then a clear note enters the chamber, and several people become aware of the same thing at once. This does not prove that the whole Fell's flute began ceremonies or signaled activities. Its precise use remains unknown. But music can create a shared moment without requiring everyone to look in the same direction. A person close to the fire and another seated in shadow can hear the same phrase. Each responds individually, yet both are held by the same sequence. A stone tool changes material. A musical instrument changes attention. It creates expectation and alters the atmosphere of the space. Once a pattern begins, listeners sense when it may continue, pause, or return. Rhythm can also shape movement. Humans adjust their timing to one another. They can clap together, step together, repeat a motion, and anticipate when another person will act. It would be too simple to claim that music created cooperation or that musical communities survived while others disappeared. Archaeology offers no such equation. Yet shared rhythm allows separate bodies to participate in one pattern. We might imagine people moving near a fire while a short phrase repeats. Some sit. Others stand or shift their weight. A child copies the motion of an older person. Hands strike skin or wood. The movement might be dance, play, practice, or something whose meaning has vanished. No elaborate ritual needs to be invented. The important detail is timing. People listen, watch, and adjust themselves to one another. Several minds begin anticipating the same next moment. For a small community, that experience may have carried value even when it produced nothing physical. Sound may also have supported memory. Before writing, knowledge passed through observation, gesture, demonstration, repeated words, stories, and experience. A repeated pattern is easier to recognize than a random sequence. When part of it changes or disappears, listeners often notice. Music may have helped preserve stories, seasonal knowledge, social practices, or a sense of group identity. No surviving melody shows whether the Swabian Jura flutes carried words or accompanied narration. Still, music and memory share a structure. Both depend upon return. A phrase appears, disappears, and comes back. Through repetition, listeners learn its shape. A route could be taught by walking it. A tool could be taught by watching hands. A song had to be carried in memory. In a world where knowledge lived mainly in people rather than objects, anything that strengthened remembrance could matter. Music also belonged to ordinary life. Ice Age communities contained children. Children watched adults prepare food, repair clothing, shape stone, work bone, and maintain fire. They learned by observing long before they could perform every task themselves. They likely heard repeated sounds as well. We cannot know whether children handled these particular flutes or whether certain instruments belonged to experienced players. But musical knowledge could continue only if someone listened, practiced, remembered, or was shown what to do. We might imagine an experienced player producing a controlled note while a younger person watches the hands. The flute is lowered and passed carefully through the firelight. The younger person studies where the fingers rest and tries to direct breath through the opening. The first result may be weak or uneven. Nothing confirms that exact scene. Yet an accidental sound can happen once. A tradition must be learned. Musical practice also required patience. A player had to notice small differences. Too much breath changed the tone. A finger moved too early altered the pattern. The action had to be repeated while the result was heard and judged. That same attention appears in carved ivory and finely worked tools. Music may have occupied the long hours when travel stopped, weather closed the valley, or darkness made movement dangerous. People waited for conditions to change. They waited for hunters to return. They remained near fires while food cooked, hides dried, and tools were repaired. Sound could fill those hours. Once an instrument had been made, it could return night after night without being rebuilt. The player carried its patterns in breath and memory. Music may also have changed how difficult moments felt. Ice Age people experienced attachment, childhood, birth, separation, exhaustion, reunion, death, and loss. Their emotional lives did not begin with cities or writing. A familiar sound might have comforted someone. A repeated phrase could reduce tension after conflict or bring recognition during an uncertain night. The flute might have accompanied joy, grief, courtship, play, gathering, storytelling, ceremony, or private experimentation. Its silence does not allow us to choose among these uses. But humans often use sound to alter a moment. A soft voice can calm. A familiar pattern can make an unfamiliar place feel less strange. Music may have performed this kind of work, not the work of cutting or carrying, but of making experience more bearable, recognizable, or shared. Musical skill may also have shaped reputation. Not everyone in a community possessed identical abilities. One person may have been especially skilled in shaping ivory. Another may have controlled breath with unusual precision. Someone else may have remembered patterns after hearing them only a few times. This does not prove the existence of professional musicians or a formal musical class. But a capable player might have been welcomed at gatherings. An instrument maker could have exchanged knowledge or objects. A melody heard in one valley could be carried to another without adding physical weight to the journey. The flute was portable. The knowledge required to play it was even more so. Music may have traveled as people exchanged materials, formed relationships, and met neighboring communities. A familiar phrase could create recognition. A different pattern might reveal that visitors carried traditions from elsewhere. Sound could preserve difference and create connection at the same time. The Swabian Jura flutes belonged to a wider landscape of remarkable activity. The same region preserved personal ornaments, carved animals, worked ivory, human representations, and forms combining human and animal features. Its stone and bone technologies reveal planning, precision, and knowledge suited to difficult environments. Music was not an isolated spark in an otherwise unimaginative world. It belonged to communities already shaping practical materials into objects that also carried appearance, memory, and meaning. This does not mean creativity suddenly appeared in Europe at one exact moment. The early Aurignacian record of the Swabian Jura is unusually rich, but preservation is uneven. Earlier forms of expression may have used materials or actions that left no recognizable evidence. Nor should these flutes be used to portray Neanderthals as silent, unintelligent, or culturally empty. Modern humans and Neanderthals lived during overlapping periods in Europe, and both possessed complex knowledge, communication, and social lives. There is no evidence that music gave Homo sapiens a simple evolutionary advantage that caused Neanderthals to disappear. Shared cultural practices may have strengthened relationships across communities, but the history of human populations cannot be reduced to one instrument or behavior. The desire to follow music deeper into the past has produced one of archaeology's most famous disagreements. At Divj Babe in present-day Slovenia, researchers found a perforated cave bear bone from a much earlier context. Some have interpreted it as a possible musical instrument associated with Neanderthals. Others argue that its openings could have resulted from animal teeth or natural damage. Its status remains disputed. The difficulty lies in recognizing intention. As evidence becomes older and more fragmentary, a damaged bone may resemble a simple flute, while a simple flute may resemble damaged bone. The object should not be presented as a confirmed instrument. But the disagreement reveals how quickly the archaeological trail of music becomes uncertain. Music may extend far beyond the oldest evidence we can confidently identify. The Swabian Jura flutes offer firmer ground because their holes, mouthpieces, shaping, and repeated forms reveal deliberate construction. Even then, deliberate construction explains only how the instruments were made. It does not reveal why they mattered. Perhaps there was never one answer. The same flute could gather attention during one evening and accompany movement during another. It might support memory, entertain listeners, comfort a child, impress visitors, or allow a player to explore the possibilities of breath and tone. An experienced person might perform for others. Someone else might play alone. Modern categories often separate ritual from entertainment, work from play, and learning from performance. Ice Age communities may not have divided experience in the same way. A gathering could be practical and meaningful at once. A repeated sound could accompany work, become play, and later carry memory. Music may have endured because it could move between purposes. It required little physical force, yet it could organize attention, invite movement, preserve familiarity, and make a pattern belong briefly to everyone who heard it. None of this filled a stomach or blocked the wind. But survival inside a community involved more than food and shelter. Knowledge had to pass between generations. People needed attention, trust, patience, memory, and relationships that could survive uncertainty. Music may have supported some of those needs. Not as a magical solution. Not as the single reason humans succeeded. As one practice among many that helped individuals live together. The flute's apparent uselessness may therefore be misleading. Its value did not reside only in bone. It appeared when breath entered the instrument and listeners recognized a pattern. Imagine an evening in the Swabian Jura after the flute has been played. The fire has fallen lower. Someone returns to repairing a tool. Food is moved away from the ash. A hide is folded. A child settles beside an older person. The instrument is carried out of the light. Nothing from the performance remains in the air. Yet someone may remember its shape. On another night, when the first notes return, recognition may arrive before the phrase is complete. Around these people are objects shaped from stone, bone, and ivory. Some resemble animals. Some were worn on the body. Others combine forms in ways whose meanings have become difficult to recover. Music did not exist alone. It belonged to a world in which people made invisible meaning through sound and visible meaning through matter. One vanished as it was performed. The others entered the earth and waited. The caves preserved the flute as an object. But its true life had existed among the people who heard it. After the music ended, the fire continued burning. Ash gathered around the glowing wood. People returned to the practical work of the evening. A tool was lifted again. A hide was folded. Food was moved away from the heat. At some point, the people left the cave. We do not know when the flute entered the sediment or how its pieces came to rest where archaeologists would eventually find them. It may have broken during use, been damaged later, or been left behind for reasons no evidence can recover. Other objects entered the earth at different times. Fragments of bone. Pieces of ivory. Charcoal from old fires. Broken tools and ornaments separated from the people who had carried them. Seasons passed through the valley. Dust settled. Water entered cracks in the limestone. Sediment accumulated in thin layers, disturbed by animals, weather, and later human visits. Thousands of winters moved across the Swabian Jura. The living sounds disappeared first. Stone endured more easily than wood. Bone sometimes survived when hide, plant fiber, and cord vanished. Ivory could remain after the hands that shaped it had become impossible to identify. The archaeological record was not a complete archive. It was a filter. The things that survived were not necessarily the things that mattered most. A melody might shape an entire evening and leave nothing. A broken fragment might survive for 40,000 years. The flute belonged to a wider world of objects recovered from caves across the Swabian Jura. Different sites and archaeological layers preserved small animals carved from mammoth ivory, personal ornaments, human forms, and figures combining features not found together in ordinary nature. Many belong to early Upper Paleolithic, or Aurignacian, contexts dating roughly between 35 and 40,000 years ago, with some contexts extending farther back. They did not all come from the same cave, the same people, or the same moment. Yet together, they reveal communities doing more than producing tools for immediate physical needs. They shaped ivory into mammoths, horses, cave lions, birds, and other animals familiar from the Ice Age landscape. The carvings were small enough to carry. Their makers knew the bodies they represented. They had watched animals move, rest, hunt, and flee. They understood which curves suggested a back, which lines created a head, and which details allowed a tiny form to become recognizable. But the figures were not simple copies. Someone selected a living form and transformed it into an object that could be held in the hand. Its exact purpose is gone. The carving remains. Personal ornaments add another glimpse. Small objects may have been worn, carried, exchanged, or attached to clothing. They could have communicated belonging, memory, preference, relationship, or something for which no modern label fits. Their significance depended not only on material, but on recognition. At Whole Fells, archaeologists also recovered a small female figure made from mammoth ivory. It is among the oldest widely accepted human figurative representations known. Its form is deliberate, but its purpose remains uncertain. It may once have been suspended or carried, yet no evidence proves how it was used or what it meant. It should not be called a goddess or proof of a particular belief. What remains clear is that someone transformed ivory into a human form whose value extended beyond cutting, scraping, or carrying. Elsewhere in the Swabian Jura, at Hohensteinstadel, fragments of mammoth ivory were eventually reconstructed into the figure commonly known as the lion man. Its body combines human and cave lion characteristics. Nothing exactly like it stood outside the cave. The maker took features observed in the world and joined them into a form that first had to exist in imagination. It cannot confidently be called a god, spirit, shaman, monster, or ritual object. Those names bring assumptions the surviving evidence cannot support. Yet the act itself is extraordinary. Someone held an image in the mind, planned how solid ivory might contain it, and then gave that imagined form a body. A musician performed a related act in another medium. A pattern could be imagined before it was played. Breath, fingers, timing, and memory then made that pattern audible. The carver made an imagined form visible. The musician made an imagined pattern audible. One remained in ivory. The other disappeared into silence. This does not mean the lion man and the flutes served the same purpose or were made by the same people. They reveal only that, across this Ice Age landscape, thought was repeatedly transformed into form. Sometimes that form could be touched. Sometimes it could only be heard. The Swabian Jura therefore preserves more than isolated examples of skill. It preserves traces of a world in which useful tools existed beside carvings, ornaments, and instruments. Materials moved across landscapes. Forms were repeated. Knowledge was learned and remembered. Music did not appear alone. But this does not prove that art, identity, religion, and music all emerged together in one sudden creative event. The archaeological record becomes unusually rich in this region and period, but preservation and excavation shape what modern researchers can see. Earlier symbolic activity may have existed in wood, fiber, pigment, gesture, body decoration, movement, or sound that left little recognizable evidence. The Aurignacian discoveries do not necessarily mark the absolute beginning of imagination. They mark a point where part of that world became durable enough to reach us. The oldest surviving example often attracts the word first. The first figure. The first ornament. The first instrument. The first song. But survival is not the same as origin. A carved mammoth could remain after the person who made it died. An ornament could lie beneath sediment after its wearer disappeared. A flute could wait underground after the musician and listeners were gone. The melody could not wait. The flute is therefore both evidence and absence. Its finger holes show that pitch could be deliberately changed. Its mouthpiece and worked surface show controlled manufacture. Its shape proves that someone expected breath to become organized sound. But the object does not contain the performance. It cannot reveal the full pattern of notes, the pauses between them, or the way a player changed the sound from one evening to another. It proves that music was made. It does not preserve the music itself. Many ancient objects reach archaeologists only in fragments. Pieces may be separated by sediment, damaged by pressure, or worn at the edges. Researchers compare material, breaks, manufacturing marks, position, and shape to understand what once existed. The lion man itself was reconstructed from numerous ivory fragments. Ancient flutes also survive in different states, from nearly complete instruments to small portions interpreted through comparison. Physical reconstruction can restore part of an object's form. Fragments of ivory can be joined where broken edges meet. A damaged bone tube can be measured and studied. A missing melody has no edge. No excavation can uncover the pause between two notes or the memory attached to a familiar phrase. Modern craftspeople and researchers can create replicas based on the surviving flutes. These can test manufacturing methods and demonstrate that similar forms are capable of controlled notes and changes in pitch. They allow breath to move through something shaped like the ancient object. They do not restore the Ice Age performance. A modern player brings different habits, expectations, breathing techniques, and musical references. A replica is not an audio recording from the Ice Age. A clear tone proves possibility. The original melody remains unknown. Nor can the whole Fell's flute be called the instrument that carried humanity's first song. It is among the earliest surviving and widely recognized musical instruments. But the earliest recognized flute is not necessarily the first flute, and the first flute would not necessarily contain the first music. Voices, rhythm, wood, reeds, hide, and plant materials may have carried sound long before bone allowed part of music to enter the archaeological record. The question, first song, must remain a question. The Swabian Jura flutes show that intentional music existed deep in human prehistory. They do not show where music began. A melody survives differently from an object. A player performs it. A listener begins to recognize its shape. Later, someone repeats it from memory. The pattern may remain close to what was heard or change slightly as timing, breath, and expectation reshape it. Music can travel without writing. But the chain depends upon living people. A song does not require a dramatic catastrophe to vanish. A player may die before teaching another person. A group may move or separate. New patterns may replace older ones. An instrument may break. A familiar phrase may be remembered less clearly until only a fragment remains. Then the last listener forgets how it continues. An ivory figure can remain underground without being understood. A song cannot wait in the same way. It needs a living mind. There is no reason to draw a direct musical line from these flutes to melodies played today. No continuous tradition can be traced across 40,000 years from one Ice Age cave into modern music. The connection is not one surviving song. It is the repeated human decision to make sound meaningful. Across different societies and times, people have continued shaping breath, rhythm, voice, and objects into patterns that exist only while someone performs and someone hears. Imagine the cave one final time. A particular melody has just been played. No one present knows it will never be heard again. The fire continues to burn. Someone adjusts a tool near the light. Another person moves food away from the ash. The evening continues without ceremony. The flute is placed beside other objects. For some time, one or more listeners may still carry the pattern. Perhaps part of it returns silently during a later journey or another winter night. Then the chain ends. The final person who remembers the sequence no longer recalls its next turn. Nothing announces the loss. The melody simply fails to return. The cave remains. Sediment gathers over the place where the instrument rests. Its pieces become separated from their purpose and from every person who once recognized their sound. Thousands of years later, careful hands recover the fragments. The material can be identified. Its age can be estimated. Its workmanship can be studied. Its shape can be reconstructed. The melody does not return with it. That is the oldest song humanity can never hear. Not one confirmed composition. Not a single first performance. But an entire vanished world of musical experience represented by instruments that survived after memory failed. The flutes of the Swabian Jura belong to a landscape of carved animals, ornaments, human forms, imagined beings, and learned skills. Their makers planned, practiced, taught, listened, remembered, and created. The objects reveal intentional music deep in human prehistory. But their greatest mystery is not a missing piece of bone. It is everything that once existed around the bone. The breath of the player. The attention of the listeners. The recognition of a returning phrase. The meaning attached to a sound that no one living can identify. Archaeology can recover the object that made the experience possible. It cannot recover the experience itself. The flute survived. The hands that made it disappeared. The listeners disappeared. And somewhere between them, humanity's oldest songs were lost.